Okay. Hi, James. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Doing fine. Thank you. Thank you for coming on this show. It's nice to have you
Thank you
here.
for having me.
So, you got a couple of books. I see them behind you there. Um, we've got Brandenburg, A Story of Berlin, and Brandenburg 2, The Ninth Circle of Hell. I was reading through your bio. It sounded very interesting. Basically, these books they're not fiction, right? They are historical fiction. Okay. But you did do some research for these books, yeah?
Yeah, pretty heavy.
Tell us a little bit about the research you did.
Well, when I was developing the story and I would come to an event or a location or had to deal with a historic personality, I would really get busy with Wikipedia and some book sources and libraries and so forth. And I collected with each book, these books are all about 110,000 words. Um, for every hour, I just estimated that for every hour I spent actually writing the books, I would do about 2 to 4 hours of research, depending on what was needed.
Okay, what sort of things were you finding in your research?
Well, for example, um, if I were to try to pin down what happened the day that Kaiser Wilhelm declared war, I would try to find out where the location was, what time of day it was, what the assembly was of the people who were there as in the crowd, and so on. And then I would fit some of my fictional characters into that situation.
Okay, was the first book about World War One and the second one about World War Two?
That's correct.
Oh, I see.
World
Okay.
War One begins with well, actually, there's a foreword that sort of as a backstory. I explain the assassination of Archduke Francis Ferdinand in Sarajevo, which led up to World War One, in my foreword. But the actual story starts with chapter one when Kaiser Wilhelm declares war there in Berlin, and that's when you're introduced to my four main characters. And I take the story up through the 1933 when Hitler comes to power, and that's when I end book one, and I pick it up in book two and go through the pre-war Nazi years and through World War II to the end.
When I was studying history, it always seemed to me that it was World War Part One and Part Two, at least as far as Germany was concerned. It seemed like it was an unfinished war at the end of World War One. Would you say that was accurate?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, there are historians that comment and say that World War One and World War Two, well, that World War Two was just a continuation of World War One with a 20-year break in between.
What I found interesting about reading through your bio was that you said you were trying to do this from the perspective of the German people. Did you find the perspective of the war different than from our side?
Yeah, yes, I did. Actually, I'd like to kind of give you a thumbnail sketch of how I got to that point. I was 80 years old. I'd just gone through a divorce and cancer surgery, and I was kind of struggling with some end of life questions. And I decided it was time to document some of my life experiences, and particularly my life experiences of interacting with German and Jewish people, of which I had a lot of interaction over a lifetime. Um, but I'm part of the generation that grew up during World War II. I was 8 years old when Germany surrendered in 1945. And I remember when the newsreels started appearing in the theaters, showing us the atrocities in the camps. And I remember the shock that we all felt. And people were throwing the question around, well, what's the matter with those people? I mean, we were already angry with the Germans because we'd just gone through a war with them. But I don't think that we were even with that, were ready for the shock that came when it all was revealed what went on in the camps. And, I would hear people say that. What's wrong with those people? Is that a flaw in German character? And so on and so on. And so for a long time, people of my generation and older, I think we struggled with that. I could jump forward, and as an adult, I taught history and languages, including German, for over 30 years, and that helped me get a little bit more insight. But my real insight came when I started going to Germany itself. The first time I went to Germany was 1961, which was 16 years after the end of World War II. And I had a little interaction with German people at that time, but it was very limited because I was just there on a summer vacation as a tourist. But later I went back and lived there for 5 years during the height of the Cold War. And that's when I began to become acquainted with Germans on a really personal level. I spoke the language, of course, but even so, many of my German acquaintances and friends, they were a little shy about discussing the Nazi years, the war years. As they began to trust me more, though, their stories started to come out. And I interacted with quite a variety of people, of course, in the 5 years I lived there. For example, at one point I was in a hospital with an appendectomy, and I was in a 10-man ward, and a couple of beds over from me was a man who had been an officer in the SS. So, I could go on with a lot of different examples of people that I met and their different stories. But as I dealt with these people, I began to understand that their perspectives and their reactions to the war were very different because of their own personal differences. And so I've tried to take some of the experiences that I heard about from people I knew, and I've sort of transposed them onto my fictional characters. I think I could describe my fictional characters in my books as composites of people I really knew. And so that's kind of how I got to the point of later in life deciding to write these books.
Was there a lot of anti-Semitism during World War I? I don't remember reading that much about that.
Well, if you read European history in general, not just German history, but European history, anti-Semitism, unfortunately, has been kind of under the surface in European culture for a long time. And, we've had outbursts of it in Russia and then, of course, in Germany and so on and so on. So we can't really say that anti-Semitism started in Germany. It was there during World War I, but on the other hand, there were Jewish men who served in the German army. I knew a man once who had been an officer in the German army in World War I, an elderly gentleman, and he was Jewish.
Anti-Semitism is sort of rearing its ugly head now.
My books are an attempt to answer the question. Like I said, after the war, people were saying, how could that happen? How could the Germans do this? Highly civilized nation, very developed, so on and so on. So my books are an attempt to clarify and try to bring some light on how the Holocaust happened. As a matter of fact, I knew Germans, excuse me, I knew Germans, younger Germans who were in their 20s when I lived there, who asked that same question. I mean, how could we do this? How did this happen in our country? And the Germans have really, I give them credit through their educational system and so forth. The Germans have done, in my opinion, a great job of confronting their terrible past.
Do you think it's been eradicated in Germany at this point?
I don't think it'll ever be totally eradicated. I mean, I'm sorry to say that, but anti-Semitism, as you indicated, it comes and goes due to a variety of circumstances and events That's not to justify it by any means. It's just, unfortunately, one of those things that cultures have dealt with over a long, long period of time, long, long before Hitler.
I want to go back to something. You said that you were in Germany in 1961. Were you there when the Berlin Wall went up?
As a matter of fact, I had a ticket I had booked a flight to Berlin from Copenhagen. I was visiting some friends in Copenhagen, and I'd been staying there several days. I remember the young man of the family knocked on my bedroom door on the morning of August 13th, and he said, "Jim, I don't think you're going to Berlin today." My ticket was, I was supposed to fly out that afternoon to Berlin. And I said, "Well, what are you talking about?" He says, "They're building a wall across the city." I said, "What? What do you mean a wall?" He said, "Well, come downstairs and look at TV." And I did. Of course, that's what all of the news was all about. I mean, it looked like World War III would start any minute. Not to make this too long a story, but I called the airline and I said, "I'm booked to go into Berlin this afternoon. What do you think?" I remember the young lady said, "Well, unless you have urgent business there, we're advising you not to. We're not saying you can't, but you shouldn't." So I didn't. So I never made it to Berlin in 1961 because the wall went up while I was there. So I came back 5 years later, and the wall was already a fact of life.
We've got just about a minute, and I want to just tie this together with your book. So, do the characters in your book, do they go through both books, World War I and World War II?
Yes. And of course, because of the the passage of time, I have to introduce new characters because they have children and so on and so on. So yes, I deal with these families from the very beginning of book one right through the end of book two. And I'm in the process right now, starting on book three. I'm about 20 chapters into the manuscript for book three, and I hope to finish that. But yeah, I carry these characters all through those both books.
Well, James, we do have to wind this down. Thank you so much for coming on. Are both books out? Have they been released?
Yes, they're on. They're available on Amazon as paperbacks, as ebooks, and I have an audio version that's available too.
Okay. Last question. Do you have a website that you want to give out?
Yes, jamescloudbooks.com. And anyone who has a question is welcome to shoot it to me, and I'll be able to tell it to them. Can I just finish up with one thought?
Yeah.
That
Go ahead.
Okay, I had a purpose for writing these books aside from just telling a story. I'm hopeful that if people read my book, they might be able to understand that what happened in Germany is maybe a risk we have to look for in our own time. And if they understand what happened in Germany, hopefully we can learn to deal with that before it becomes a problem in our own time and prevent a Holocaust from happening again anywhere else. Matter of fact, and I want to also point out that what I've tried to bring out in the book is no race, culture, or individual is immune to inhumanity under certain circumstances. I know we like to think that we wouldn't do those things, but we try to look at the story through the German perspective and understand how they got to that point and the choices they had. And so I've left a motto on the cover of my book, which says, "It man's inhumanity to man belongs to no race and carries no passport."
Interesting. All right, James, we do have to wrap this up. Thank you again for coming on the show. Best of luck with the books.
Thank you.